Welcome back to your regularly scheduled Writing Women. This time we're going into another Tamora Pierce trilogy. The first book in this trilogy is called Terrier, and it's part of the Provost's Dog series. Terrier is about Rebekah Cooper, the long time ago ancestor of George Cooper, who eventually married Alanna the Lioness. This series is an interesting one to be going through right now because the dogs are essentially the police force of Chorus. A city guard type organization isn't directly analogous to a modern day police force, but they are a precursor to them. They act as peacekeepers, enforce the king's law, and are corrupt as hell. Oops, gave away the game a little bit early. More on that later. Terrier was published in 2006 and was received generally positively. It seems the main thing that many readers didn't like was the diary-style first-person narration, and the frequent use of jargon that didn't really match with how the other books were written. I can only imagine that a lot of the stuff like the jargon was intended to really set this book apart from the others and reinforce that it was a really different time. If you get really annoyed by stuff like calling women mots and men coves instead of just saying women and men, you're probably going to get really annoyed reading this book. There's a lot of complaints about Beka's absolutely perfect memory, including remembering every single detail of every situation she's in during the day and remembering every single word said in every single conversation she has, which would be fine if it was a third-person normal narration, but is a little weird when it's written down by someone who's supposed to be remembering it as they write. And also that she has the time to sit down and write down all of this in excruciating detail every single day, while also still finding time to sleep and get all of her training in and visit with her friends and visit with her family and visit all of her dust spinners and talk with the pigeons. The writing in the diary is hand-waved away as her practicing her memory exercises that she learned in the dogs, which I guess teach her to have a photographic memory. I definitely understand why the memory thing could be a huge turnoff for people, because it kind of is for me. It breaks the illusion a little bit. I read this when it came out, and I liked it well enough at the time. I did the same with the following two books, but I haven't looked at them at all since they came out. Going back through this time was an experience, though. Before I get too much further talking about it, I'll go ahead and do a plot synopsis, and also sign out of my video intro. Back to my comfort zone. I'm trying to experiment with the whole video thing, but it's really difficult. I get very nervous when I have a camera on me. Anyway, into the synopsis. Rebekah Cooper is 16 and starting her time with the Provost dogs, the city guard of a chorus that is 200 years before the one we know at this point. New dogs are called puppies and are assigned to train with pairs of experienced dogs. Beka has lived in the home of the Lord Provost Gershom of Harris since she was a child. A much younger Beka and her family lived in the lower city, the worst part of Chorus. Her father wasn't in the picture, and her mother took up with a thug, or rusher in the book's patois, who beat her severely. A young Beka chased this man and found out that he was part of the Bold Brass gang, who were notorious in Chorus and difficult to catch. She tried reporting it to the dogs that she knew the hideout of the gang, but they didn't take her seriously and sent her packing. So instead, she tracks down the Lord Provost in the street and tells him she knows where the gang is hiding. He actually listens to her and is able to take in the entire gang. Lord Gershom takes pity on Beka's family and welcomes them into his home. Her dying mother is happy to see her children cared for and moved from the lower city. Beka knows that she wants to grow up and become a dog to help people, and her other siblings are being groomed by the lady of the house for lives as ladies' maids, etc., etc. Now as a puppy, Beka is assigned to the legendary pair of lower city dogs, Tunstall and Goodwin. They've never had a puppy and at first believe that Beka will be a hindrance to them. Mostly Goodwin believes this, and Tunstall is good-humored about the whole thing. They start to get the scent of a massive criminal undertaking in the city. 3-year-old Roland Lofts has been murdered. Roland is the son of Beka's childhood friend Tansy and her husband Heron. Heron is himself the grandson of Ammon Lofts, known by his criminal name, Crookshank. Crookshank is the second most powerful man in the lower city next to the Rogue. He owns houses and rents them at cutthroat prices to needy families and capitalizes off their misery. Many of his properties are in the cesspool, the most financially destitute and violent part of the lower city. The murder of Cruikshank's great-grandson is big news in the city, and Beka's dogs seek information on who could have done it. Beka visits the loft home with her dogs and goes to see Tansy to make sure that she's eating instead of starving herself from grief. Tansy is pregnant again, and this reminder is enough to bring her out of her grief-stricken shell. Beka's dogs hadn't known of her friendship with someone who married into the Loft family, but encourage her to see Tansy in the hopes that she can find something useful for the investigation. Tansy gives Beka a shiny stone, which is later identified as a raw fire opal. It had been a gift from Tansy's husband, but she can't bear to keep it, thinking that it must have brought bad luck to her with the death of her child. A complicating factor in all this is Beka's mysterious magical abilities. She doesn't have a normal gift, but instead hears the voices of spirits who are attached to the city's pigeons. The spirits stick to the pigeons because they don't understand they are dead, and she hears the spirits talking about their lives, often lamenting the fact that they're dead. She also hears bits and pieces of speech gathered by magical dust spinners that exist on the street corners around the city. On one of the pigeons, she hears the voice of young Roland calling out for his mother. Once in the night market, the pigeon holding Roland's spirit finds Beka and Tansy, who is out shopping. The boy's spirit takes control of the bird and flies around Tansy, screaming in a voice that only Beka can hear at first for his mother to take him home. Beka grabs Tansy to protect her, and somehow the physical contact allows her to hear the voice as well. Beka has to quickly explain about the birds to her and their connection to the Black God, and tells Tansy that she has to tell Roland he is dead and that he has to go to the peaceful realm, or his spirit is going to stay in this tortured limbo. Tansy is obviously traumatized by this, but does what she's told. Roland's spirit departs, and Beka has to explain everything that just happened to her dogs. Their knowledge of her magic comes in handy when she explains to them that she hears the voices of murdered folk who were killed after digging up something in the lower city. At this point, more fire opals are appearing, and the dogs have no clue from where, as the only known mine that can produce this many is in Carthak. Cruikshank believes the rogue to be responsible for the murder of his grandson and publicly accuses him of such, while Tunstall and Goodwin are collecting the happy bag bribes from the court of the rogue. A fire at Cruikshank's house gives the dogs the opportunity to snoop after getting people out. They find a note signed by the Shadow Snake, demanding fire opals in exchange for the boy's return. Obviously, the ransom wasn't paid and the boy died. Beka has new friends living in the house she rents a room at. Rosto the Piper and his girls Aniki and Cora. Rosto dislikes the way the current rogue is handling the city and plans to take his place and give the people a rogue who looks after them the way it should be. Cora is a mage and takes work as a washerwoman. She hears gossip about kidnapping and murder of people in the lower city and rumors of this Shadow Snake, who was previously thought to be some type of child's boogeyman. Parents would tell their kids, "Eat your vegetables or the Shadow Snake will come get you." Together with Beka, they unravel the mystery of this child's boogeyman come to life. The Shadow Snake has been operating in the lower city for years, kidnapping kids of people who have something of value and demanding it as payment, then murdering the kids if the family doesn't pay. Roland is merely the most recent of these victims. The dogs have done nothing about the disappearance, and neither has the rogue, because people disappear in the lower city all the time. The unraveling of this years-long web of destruction inflicted on the poor becomes Beka's sole purpose. She and her dogs figure out that Cruikshank had found fire opals in the pink rock foundations of some of his properties in the cesspool, and was hiring crews to dig them out. The crews were hired under the pretense of digging wells and made to keep the work secret, then murdered and their bodies left buried in the holes they had already dug, to keep the whole thing a secret. Guards are hired to keep an eye on the diggers, and mage marks are used to kill them if they are ever questioned. The Shadow Snake somehow heard about these fire opals and pulled their same old trick of kidnapping and demanding ransom. Toward the end, the snake tries it again, this time kidnapping Heron, the adult grandson of Cruikshank and husband of Tansy. Cruikshank brings a hired army to the court of the rogue and turns it upside down trying to find Heron, and still thinking the rogue is the Shadow Snake. He also threatens to make Tansy lose her baby so the child can't be used against him when it is born. All of this to avoid giving up his opals. Using her new friends in the court of the rogue, and with the help of the Lady Knight Sabine, Beka and her dogs stake out the slave market, where they were tipped off that Cruikshank's guards collect their pay. They are able to follow the guards back to the current dig site and raid it. They use a mage to disable the killing marks and take prisoners. The current digging team is freed, and the dogs find the bodies of the previous crews left in other houses nearby. With that wrapped up, they also find the man they believe to be the Shadow Snake, Yates Knoll, one of 6 children by the popular baker Deirdre Knoll, who is found holding Heron prisoner, but he kills himself rather than be taken into custody. Tunstall and Goodwin free Heron, and Beka goes to Mistress Knoll's shop to deliver the bad news. When she arrives, she puts the pieces together that Yates was not the Shadow Snake. His mother was. She remembers Deirdre hating Tansy Lofts, despite speaking well of her when being questioned by the dogs, and Beka has also seen Deirdre wearing one of the items Beka's investigations reported as given to the snake. Mistress Knoll is taken into custody, and Beka is finally able to speak in public when she gives her report to the magistrate in court. She tells the whole story from beginning to end, including her entire personal investigation, and is congratulated for her work. Her siblings are there and seem proud of her, despite earlier in the story being put off by her desire to become a dog. Lord Gershom is also very proud of her. Roster the Piper has now taken over the court of the rogue, and he kisses Beka in celebration. She's attracted to him, but she doesn't want to get involved with a criminal. Now that I've finished the summary, things are going to get a bit spicy. Let's talk about Coppaganda. It's a blanket term that if you haven't heard it before, it's basically anything that presents a nice, rosy, well-meaning image of law enforcement. It can be books, movies, TV shows, or even a nice video of a police officer rescuing a cute little kitty cat from a tree. I would wager that most of us have some sort of Coppaganda we enjoy, despite the reality of law enforcement being less than stellar. For me, it's Brooklyn Nine-Nine and, well...
In New York City, the dedicated detectives who investigate these vicious felonies are members of an elite squad known as the Special Victims Unit. These are their stories.
This book is one of the most effective and subtle types of it that I've ever seen. With the fantasy world veneer and the cute names, dogs and puppies instead of officers and recruits, it's not immediately recognizable for what it is. I want to talk about two things specifically and save the rest for the next two books. I will also save my thoughts on Beka and her dogs for the end of this episode. The two things I want to talk about here specifically is the excessive use of force to coerce criminals and the casual corruption of the dogs. Over and over in this book, we come across scenes where excessive force is being used against rats that Beka and her dogs have captured. One time, Tunstall is described as repeatedly bouncing the head of a rat to get him to give up information. Another time, they go into a long, laughing threat of torture by the cage dogs to frighten another rat into talking. It is outright said that the cage dogs are effective in getting information from rats through torture. We see this over and over in shows featuring some type of law enforcement. Beat somebody up until they talk, and the information gets the main character what they want. The oversaturation of media with scenes like this is a huge contributing factor to the continued misunderstanding in the general population of the effectiveness of torture. It's been proven again and again that torture is ineffective, but you watch shows or movies or play a game or even in this case read a book and you repeatedly come across scenes of torture getting good information. It would probably be difficult to write about a medieval law enforcement structure without having to include some scenes of guards beating up criminals, but including the idea that torture equals good information can be so extremely damaging to the intended audience for this book. In this carefully crafted universe, every criminal brought in is guilty of their crimes, so it's easier to hand-wave away stuff like that as, well, they deserve it because they're clearly guilty. I've talked about it a lot before, and I promise you I will continue to do so. But putting these ideas in people's heads through fiction can have an effect on how they view the world. There's a reason so many people cite some books or movies as changing their lives. For a good number of people, that thing that changed their life was stumbling onto Tamora Pierce's work. So the constant presence of effective torture and justified brutality by law enforcement is a little upsetting. On to my second point, the casual corruption of the dogs. The dogs collect weekly happy bags or bribes as part of their regular duties, but that's the more obvious and thus less interesting to me part of the corrupt system. At one point very early on, Beka's dogs bring her to a wizard. They want Beka to show him the shiny rock given to her by Tansy. He lies to them and says it isn't anything important but tries to keep it anyway, only to be foiled by Pounce the cat who knocks the gem to the ground where it falls between the floorboards. Did I mention Pounce in the synopsis? I don't think I did. Anyway, Pounce is the cat constellation in a previous physical incarnation, this time helping out Beka, who was a chosen of the Black God instead of the Great Goddess. Anyway, back to the wizard. Beka writes that she hates him because he's a gross pervert who gets handsy with her and others. Remember, she's currently 16 and this is an adult man. And during this encounter, he grabs her arm and leers at her. Goodwin steps up and basically tells him that if he doesn't leave Beka alone, she may have to actually investigate all those rumors about his behavior toward women. Turns out, Goodwin is the magistrate of the goddess temple. I'm sorry, what? She knows the rumors about him, and her actual job as a dog is to protect people. Then on top of that, her position as a magistrate for the goddess puts her in a position where she specifically is supposed to investigate people like folk to protect women, and she just doesn't do it? This is the moment I lost any possible respect that I may have had for Goodwin, but also any respect for the Provost dogs in general. It is so common it makes me sick for organizations like that to let corruption and sexism run rampant, and the women in the organization either shut up or get the worst of it. And that would be fine if the narrative were about reforming the dogs and Goodwin being forced to stay silent because of the patriarchal system that allows mistreatment of women, but it isn't. The narrative is about the brave, dedicated dogs who serve with honor and bring justice to people despite the thankless nature of their job, with a lot of women serving in the dogs, so it even seems like it's a pretty equal organization. It just rubs me the wrong way. Another thing that rubs me the wrong way, though to a lesser extent, is the dynamic of Goodwin and Tunstall. They function as teachers for Beka and also fulfill the role of the mean, shrewish mother and the goofy, warm father figure. That dynamic has been done to death, and every time I see it, I just get a little more annoyed by it. We get the mean woman who is just mean for the sake of it because her partner, who is on the same legendary level as her, is this warm, funny, friendly guy. You know, because women in positions of power are always mean to get where they are. I'll stop there with the negativity because there's more that will be much more relevant in the future books. Instead, let's talk about Beka. Her shyness is something I identify with hard. I'm an okay public speaker, but I am so afraid of the actual speaking that I make myself physically ill over it. I like her weird magic that isn't flashy or controllable the way others have it. It's passive and it exists more to serve others than to serve herself. Her sense of right and wrong and willingness to put herself in harm's way to give people justice is admirable. I like having her live in the house on Mutpiddle Lane and loving it instead of pining after her rich home with the Lord Provost. She's a nice main character for this series and the one of Tammy's main characters that I thought I looked most like when I was young, so I'm a bit biased. I do have some things about her character that I will talk about more toward the end of the series, because right now I'm just enjoying her introduction to the world. That's all I've got for this week. If you like this video, please give me a like, it does help me out a lot. I'd like to welcome my 2 new subscribers since my last video, and as always, I welcome any disagreement or discussion in the comments. This series in particular, I'm interested in hearing what y'all think, because it seems to be the most controversial one in the Tortall universe, with a lot of people just omitting it from their rereads because they don't have as much of an emotional connection to it. I don't have the YouTube clout to be monetized, so thanks to my patrons whose contributions have helped me out a lot lately. If you'd like early access to some of my videos, some behind-the-scenes content, and get to have a say in the direction I take my one-off episodes in, you can join for as little as $2 a month at patreon.com/writingwomen. I'd also like to thank the members of the Tamora Pierce fan Discord server who corrected me on some stuff I had misremembered from my reread of this book when we were discussing it in the Provost Dog channel. Thank you to my current patrons, Mary Doc Brandybuck, Miss Psycho, Amy Chu aka The Doctor, Lord Butterbutt, and Bruce.